the song of encouragement, or I guess there's no marker in this book, but turn to the song of encouragement. It'll be number 97 out of the supplemental servant song, number 97. Certainly good to see everyone out here this evening. Always good to be able to come out on Wednesday and to study from God's Word. And we want to take this opportunity to extend the invitation to any that either have not responded in obedience to the gospel to do so, or if you have, but you've been unfaithful, to make the necessary corrections. We do this when we come together, every time we come together. I'd offer that invitation. But I think if we're going to talk about the invitation and extending it, the best place to go is to the greatest preacher there's been, which is to go look at Christ extending the invitation. So if you will turn to Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11. This is the invitation of Jesus. Matthew chapter 11, he begins at verse 25, and we'll read through verse 30. At that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent, and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for this way was well-pleasing in your sight. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal him. Here's really the invitation part of Jesus' lesson here. Come to me, verse 28. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. As Jesus is offering the invitation here, there's a few things that we learn. The first of those is about who the invitation is available to, and that is everyone. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden. At some point in life, everybody is going to come to be weary and heavy laden. That invitation is available to everyone. And what he's promised is if you come to him, he will give you rest. Jesus offered an invitation to everyone that if you're weary and heavy laden, you come to me, and what I'll do is instead of you having to worry about being weary and heavy laden, I'm going to give you rest. You do that by verse 24, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Christ sets for us the greatest example that anyone could ever set. I think I used this illustration before in a sermon. There was, several years ago, I don't know the exact date, but a man set out to be the first ever to run a 4-minute mile. And the way that he did that was he took the two best runners in the world at a half mile. Nobody ever run under 4 minutes before, but he took the two fastest runners of a half mile. And they get to a half mile and they sort of taper off. So he'd have one run the first half mile, and he'd follow them, and then he'd go to the second half mile, and the second guy would start running, and he'd follow him. And if you're going to learn to run a 4-minute mile, I guess running with the two fastest people in the world at the half mile, you pick the best people at running in the world and run with them. That's a pretty good example of how to run. When it comes to how we need to live our life, you're not going to find a better example than the perfect example of Christ. He's gentle. He's humble. And he says, if you come to him and you take his yoke, you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You recall later on in the earthly ministry of Jesus, in chapter 23 of the book of Matthew, that he points out about the Jewish leaders who are trying to bind burdens that are too heavy for they themselves to bear. And what Jesus says is, if you come to me, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. It's not going to be this impossible weight for you to bear. It would be pointed out by John later on in 1 John chapter 5. Everyone who believes that Jesus is the Son, or is the Christ, verse 1 beginning, has been born of God, and everyone who loves the Father, who gives the new birth, loves also the one who's been born of him. By this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and do his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. What Jesus offered in Matthew chapter 11 in this invitation was he says, I'm offering it to everybody. What I'm offering to you is to come to me, to take my yoke, and it's not too hard for you to bear. It's not an impossible, crushing task. Sometimes I may look at the Christian life as though it's a impossible task. Sometimes you'll talk to somebody about obeying the gospel, and they may make a statement like this: well, I just don't know that I can live a Christian life. And then if you press a little deeper, what you'll find out is they'll say, I don't know that I can live a perfect life. Well, no, we need to avoid sin. The Scriptures point that out. But God has given us a second law of pardon, because if we're Christians for very long, there's going to be times we mess up. But He didn't make it impossible for us. Even at that, He didn't give us any commandment we can't keep. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, or 1 Corinthians chapter 10, rather, verse 12 and 13. He talks about, let him who thinks he stand take heed lest he fall. No temptation is overtaking you except such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond which you are able. Well, with the temptation, provide the way of escape. There's nothing in God's word here that's too difficult for us to keep. What Jesus has said is, if you come to me, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Come to Him. Come to the one that is humble and gentle. And you can have the forgiveness of sins, and you can have the hope of rest. Not earthly rest, but eternal rest. And far greater than being able to rest for a few moments on this earth is to be able to be with God forever in eternity, in the ultimate rest. And Lord willing, in a few weeks, we'll be in Hebrews 3 and 4, and that's exactly what we're going to see in those chapters. Is that God promised rest to Israel, but there remains, therefore, a rest for the people of God. And so if you're here this evening and you've not yet responded in obedience to the gospel, but you're one of those that's weary and heavy laden, if you'll come to Christ and you'll submit to His will, then you can have the forgiveness of sins and the hope of heaven when life on earth is over, knowing that His yoke is easy and His burden is light. It's not impossible for you to do. Maybe you're here and you've done that, but somewhere along the line I've not been as faithful as I need to be. If it's a sin of a private nature, take it to the Lord privately in prayer. But if it's a sin of a public nature, you would desire the prayers of the congregation. We'll gladly pray with you and for you for God to forgive you. No matter what your need is, if we can assist you this evening in any way, would you not right now?